time, and we certainly could. I'm happy to go whatever direction the audience wants to, but we could wind up not finishing the slide deck. So however folks want to do it.
Okay, no problem. So if I see something relevant that might be to what you're talking about at that moment, then I'll go ahead and interrupt you. Otherwise, I'll kind of pull them up and pick the best ones for the end of the session then.
All right.
And then we'll finish when we finish.
Sounds good.
All right, sounds good, Kevin.
Okay.
Oh, well, guys,
Okay,
I want to introduce you to a good friend of mine who I've known in the industry for a number of years. This is Brian Knight, by the way, founder of Pragmatic Works. Kevin Kline is a Director of Engineering Services over at SQL Century. SQL Century is a software company that makes the performance tools for the SQL Server stack, but Kevin has been specializing for many years on soft skill training and leadership skill training as well, especially around the IT space. So, Kevin, I'm going to hand it over to you, and thank you very much for doing this for us today.
Oh, happy to, Brian, and always good to talk to you. So it's a pleasure I don't get to enjoy too often enough. So yes, just as a note of introduction, I've written many books, 12 books now. Been a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional since 2003. I was the founder of, one of the founding members of the International Professional Association for SQL Server, as well as a couple different business units and some big companies over the years. So I've done a lot of entrepreneurial work. There on the opening slide, you can see that I have two websites. Kevin E. Kline is where I put all my technical information, and then another website, for IT Pros, is where all of the kind of leadership and soft skill influence and those kinds of content are presented and available to you. So I'm going to hurry past a couple slides as we jump in. But as Brian mentioned, if you have a question, go ahead and fire it off into the chat and the Q&A panel, and we'll see if we can fit all of those in as we go through the process of getting through the slides. All right. Let me flip over here. Now, this is just a boilerplate slide about my company. If you are interested in tools that help with SQL Server, make sure you grab the slide deck and take a look at this particular slide. We've got a lot of offers and a lot of things for free. And we're done. End of commercial. The agenda for today, I'm going to spend a little time talking about some very common myths about influence, persuasion, and leadership. Then we're going to spend about half of our available time talking about influence. So for those of us who are primarily not in an authority position, I guess you could say, one of the things that we all want to do is to be more influential and to be able to persuade people to our point of view. And so that influence that carries weight topic is about how we do that without actually ever being given authority, kind of a passive way of building influence and high credibility in our organization. The second half of our session today will be about what we call direct appeals. And what that means is I'm going to actively try to change your mind or get you to do something or get you to not do something. I'm actively trying to sway your behavior. So influence can be very passive. Just by being present, you might be able to cause people to want to emulate you. And you haven't actually ever said anything. Whereas persuasion is where we're actually giving it a shot. We want people to do a particular thing or to stop doing something. So the second half of our time today will be around that. So the first thing that I want to talk about is some myths that are very common out there in the world today. One thing that is very common is this idea that the kind of person that you are, the personality that you display, is going to have the biggest impact on your degree of influence and persuasiveness. If you are a naturally kind of reserved person, you're quiet, you're an introvert, a lot of people will say, that's just not something I can do. I just don't have what it takes to be influential or to be persuasive. And the good news for you is that's not true. Study after study, and all of my research and training classes and so forth, which I offer with private customers, is all based on what the latest research is telling us. And the research shows that personality type, if you've ever had a DISC personality psychometric test or a Myers-Briggs or Strength Finder, any of those things, you can be very, very influential while being an introvert, let's say. In fact, it surprises a lot of people to hear that when you look at presidents of the United States, who you might say are one of the most influential and obviously must have some degree of persuasiveness, of any kind of person out there, it's almost a 50-50 split between introverts and extroverts. And the reason for that is because there are strengths to introversion that can make your persuasiveness especially effective. There's another I word that goes along with introversion, and that is introspection. So a lot of introverts are willing to take time to think about their situation, to reflect on it, and to kind of meditate on the problem before they open their mouth. So what we find with introverts is that they tend to, when they speak, it tends to be fully formed ideas. Extroverts, on the other hand, who, they're more willing to speak up, but they're also more willing to speak up when they have only a half-baked idea. And half-baked ideas don't build your credibility. It's the fully baked, smart response, the smart idea that you put forward that builds credibility. And so it's the sort of thing, excuse me, that don't let anybody tell you that if you're quiet, if you're an introverted, that's not true. You can be absolutely effective as an influencer and a persuader. Another thing that is really important to note is that people will say things like, that leader is that person is a natural born leader. And the fact is, nobody is a natural born leader. What has happened to that person somewhere in their past is that their behaviors of leadership were reinforced through positive reinforcement. Somebody said, wow, you really took charge. They're 10 years old and they're playing soccer, and somebody said, wow, you really took charge, and told those other guys on your team to hit the defensive positions, and you kept them from scoring. Wow, that's neat. And so all that happened to them, these people that we call natural born leaders, is they hit on these ideas that I'm going to talk about with you today kind of way earlier in their life, so that they get these kind of subtle subconscious positive reinforcements that, hey, that behavior you just exhibited is great. I want to see more of that. And it's a behavior. It's something we do. It is not something that you simply have born into you. So a trait might be whether a person is studious or not, or retiring, or not, or whether they are, kind of energetic or not. Those are traits, and those are built-in things. We're not really going to be able to change that element of our person, but behaviors we can change all the time. And in fact, in other sessions when we talk about correcting your employees or your subordinates and correcting behavior, we talk about the idea that you don't criticize a person's traits. If somebody says to me, Kevin, you're such a cut-up. You are always interrupting meetings because you're making jokes, and that has got to stop. I might say, a jokester is what I am. That's built into my personality. I can't stop being who I am. But if my boss said, Kevin, every time you cut up like that, our meetings run over or we run out of time. I need you to stop joking around during those meetings so we can focus on what's important. Well, what my boss just said to me was that I don't need you to change who you are, your personness. I need you to change your behavior. And I would say, oh, well, I can accept that. If I'm disrupting things and there's a very obvious outcome to my behavior, I can change that, but I can't change my traits. And so influence and persuasion, a lot of people think that these are traits, but they're not. They're behaviors, and you can learn behaviors. Now, I mentioned how the first half of what we're going to talk about today is around influence. This is passive. This is a way we generate the ability to motivate people without actually, getting up and, drawing on a whiteboard and trying to convince them of something. And it's built around a number of different behaviors. And if we don't have every single one of these behaviors, we can usually still be very, very effective influencers. However, if we're missing 3 of them, it's going to be a lot harder. If we miss, 2 of them, we still have a pretty good chance of building up what we would call political capital, the kind of ability to convince people that, a particular course of action is a good course of action without actually having explicit authority and without necessarily having to, to make a pitch for someone to follow what you're proposing or what you think is the right thing to do. And I'm going to talk to each of these on a slide. So we'll have one slide for each of these. But underlying all of these things, all 5 of these approaches to building influence through a passive set of means, is the idea of the law of reciprocity. And this is an interesting thing, and you probably have seen it in action and not really realized what's at work here. But what happens is, let's say we are we're a communicator, we're talking to people, and we won't give any time to, let's say we won't give any time, for example, to let other people talk. Well, people begin to learn that that's going to happen. You're not someone who brooks interruption. And so what does that mean? That means if I want to talk to you, I actually have to talk over you. They're reciprocating in kind. You didn't respect their desire to speak up and add to the conversation, so they're going to have to not respect your desire to have a fair say. If you are willing to listen to people's opinions, people will turn around and reciprocate in kind. In fact, if you are a great listener, people will seek you out and are also, conversely, willing to listen to you when you have something to say. And again, if you're that sort of introverted person, you may think, I don't have it to be a communicator, which is not true. You will hear all the time people say of another person, he or she is a person of few words. And that's a compliment. And what they're saying is, that person doesn't talk a lot, but when they do, I want to know what they have to say, because it's almost always very valuable information. So let's talk about the core. This is one you have to have no matter what your profession is. You're a business owner, you are you're a IT person, you're a financial accountant, any of those things. You have to be competent at your job if you want to build influence. If you're in sales and you're not making your quota regularly, you're not going to be able to influence anybody else to try new sales things. It's going to be really, really hard. There are some exceptions to that rule. For example, if no one is making their quota, then everybody's going to be scratching their head. But it's the kind of thing that if you're not competent, you're not good at what you do, people begin, that's your whole foundation. So that erodes your reputation and your credibility. And technical competence, too, isn't always necessarily what your head knowledge. A lot of people will tell you that when they are interviewing new employees, they're not just hiring that person, they're hiring their network. So if you have 2 associates of equal credibility in the organization, but one is really well connected on social media and knows experts online who will respond to their questions, that person is going to have a higher degree of competence, and commensurately, they're going to have a higher degree of credibility. Here's something that's really interesting, and a lot of people don't realize this is the case, and particularly if you're a little bit on the introverted side, which is, even if you don't have an opinion, if you express, I've got no opinion, you get credit, you get points for it. You build up political capital. So if you are just silent, people think you don't know and you don't care. You don't have an opinion of any kind. If, on the other hand, let's say you have a great boss who is always soliciting opinions from the team about, what would be the best way to do something. He's always looking for consensus. And if every time you don't say anything, because you don't really have an opinion, that's what he'll begin to think. He'll absolutely begin to think that you don't have an opinion and you don't care. Conversely, if you say, I don't have an opinion, that gets more points than saying nothing. And of course, if you do have an opinion, you'd want to express it if it's based on things that make much sense, if it's a logical and well-thought opinion. Now, here's another thing that makes that even more powerful when you do this, if you don't have an opinion, and that is to spend some time, if your company doesn't state it explicitly, find out what the top values of the company are. So I'm going to use my friend Brian as an example here. So I know Brian's company and some of the things they do, and he has consultants that work in his organizations. And one of the things that the consultants in his company do is they are really, really focused not only on meeting the needs of their customers according to their requirements, but they're there for customer service. They're there to make the customer happy, and even to teach them things as well in the future. So let's say, for example, the customer says, oh, do you think I should learn this particular new kind of this new kind of technology? And the person has got no opinion. It's not even in their field. The consultant that works for Brian doesn't care at all, but that person does know that Pragmatic Works values customer service. So that person might say, I don't know, and I don't really care a lot about that particular topic. It's not in my field, but you know what? I know my company cares a lot about customer service. So why don't you let me take a little time? I'm going to research the different choices you have, and I'll come back to you with an educated opinion. And so what he said is, I don't know and I don't really care, but what I do know are the values of my company. And so I don't have an opinion, but I'll formulate one based on the value. If your company values speed of delivery, and somebody says, I need you to do X, Y, Z, or do you think we should do choice 1 or choice 2? And you might say, I don't have any opinion. It doesn't make any difference to me, but I know that our company values speed, and it seems like choice number 2 is the faster of these two. So let's, not knowing anything else, that's what I would lean towards. So learn what your values are in a corporate and team environment, and you're going to be able to really impress people. Your opinion is going to carry weight. So you base those on shared values. If you can, you want to present relevant information, particularly in technical situations if you work in a technical or knowledge-based organization. Not necessarily in manufacturing or perhaps in a sales team, but if you're in let's say you work with a group of chemists or your IT or something like that, sometimes it's important to cite experts. And that's your backup. That's kind of your well of credibility. Hey, the experts say that we should do, choice number 2. That's what I think as well. And then finally, technical competence on the job, usually is not given to people who just put in the required hours. If you're there, just 10 minutes late and you leave a little bit early whenever you get the chance, and you check Facebook all the time, and you're even if you're getting your work done, a lot of times people will begin to mentally deduct points in terms of your credibility and your competence. So you want to be aware of that. You don't have to work a lot harder than your peers, but if it is noticeably different, it will make a big difference. Finally, the last thing about technical competence that I want to point out, and I do have a little bit about this later on in the slide deck, is that many people lack self-awareness, and it's one of the terrible things about people who are explicitly in positions of authority, like Dilbert's pointy-haired boss. He's got no self-awareness, and so many of the people who need it the most exhibit the least self-awareness. But where this can make you really, really strong is to actually recognize where you're weak and publicly admit it. This gives you other opportunities down the line to build alliances with people who shore up your weaknesses, and it also gives you the ability, just like a sports coach might get you to sign up for a specific kind of performance coach. If you're in football, you might spend a lot of time with the strength coach. I want to build up your strength. Your physical strength, because I know that you're fast, but you're not as strong as you could be. So we want to shore up that weakness. But here's the interesting thing: the research has shown that if you have several areas where you're really strong and a couple areas where you're weak, all you want to achieve in your weak areas is kind of a remedial level of competency. So let's say, for example, you work in an organization that doesn't require a lot of math, and you're terrible at math. And you're like, whew, I don't have to learn anything new about math. Well, you do want to get to the point where you can at least do the things that people get asked on a regular basis: multiply and divide, maybe the basics of algebra, and get that to that level. What that does is that adds a percentage to your overall productivity. However, in the long run, if you are able to spend time working on your strengths, so let's say right now you're pretty good as a presenter. You're the best on your team, and you could be great, but you're not. If you spend your time working on your strengths, instead of adding 10 or 20% to your overall productivity, like working, remediating your weaknesses, by working on your strengths, you're actually going to become twice as productive or 3 times as productive. It's a very interesting sort of a pattern that the productivity experts and the efficiency experts have seen over time, that by working on your strengths, you get much better. By shoring up your weaknesses, you get a little bit better. So keep that in mind. And finally, technical competence. So this goes back to professionalism as well, which I have a slide for, but you just got to care, and people can really tell if you do or you don't. So make sure you kind of invest yourself emotionally in what you're doing. Now, the next slide is communications, and this is outbound communications. And know the value of what we call bluff, which is bottom line up front. A lot of people will take a lot of time getting to the point. In fact, they may snow you with details, and this actually obfuscates the message. I don't know what you're trying to tell me because there's so much going on. So when you're communicating with others, people will notice you are a better communicator because you say what you mean right up front, and then say, do you want to know why I think that? Or, do you want to know why that's my opinion? You want more details? And people will say, heck yeah, I do. Or a lot of times, if you have built up some credibility, they'll be like, no, I trust you. That sounds reasonable. Also, one of the things I find a lot with people, particularly when they are communicating with people they see occasionally, perhaps people in another team that you see in a meeting once a week, they don't really know their point of view. They don't know their experiences. They don't know much about their audience. And so they wind up using analogies that don't work at all. Let's say, for example, I go to a group of, my wife meets in this thing called MOPS every week, Mothers of Preschool Children. And if I go to MOPS and I start talking about some kind of thing that they're moderately interested in, but I'm using nothing but football analogies, they're going to hate the presentation, right? Whereas if I talk about, diapers, they're like, yeah, I'm totally in tune with that, because they're all mothers of preschool kids. So think about what your audience knows and focus on speaking in a way that they can relate to. Also, one thing that a lot of people do is when they're speaking, they're trying to impress you with how smart they are or funny they are. And try not to do that. Keep your ego out of it and focus on what it is you want them to come away from that conversation knowing that they didn't know before. Another thing for leaders, I know we've got several on the call who are business owners, and one of the things that is very important to remember is that even when you say nothing, you are sending a message. This is particularly important towards the development of a team or an organizational culture. So if I'm the owner of a business and I hear some of my employees cracking really crude jokes that are chauvinistic or racist or sexist or something like that, and I don't correct them, I don't say anything about it, that sends a message, right? That says I tolerate it. And so that sort of thing can really, really sneak up on you when you don't mean for it to. And another example might be if there's some uncertainty in the business. And I don't say, everything's fine, guys, don't worry, this acquisition is not going to challenge anybody's jobs, everybody's safe. If I don't tell people that, they're going to assume that their job isn't safe. So remember, when you're communicating and you're in a position of leading through communications, you better be talking all the time, even when you think this is obvious, because for many people it is not. All right, I've got to make some time here. We've got a lot to talk about and not much time. Don't ramble. That's the last one there. And then when listening, there's a couple things here that I just want to point out quickly. First is be fully present in the conversation. So many times when we are the listener in a conversation, what we're actually doing is, and I know I'm guilty of this, what we're actually doing is we're thinking about what we're going to say next to the speaker that's going to be brilliant, you know. And so I've already tuned out because I'm thinking about what I am saying next. And people pick up on that. It's very interesting that when you are speaking to someone, if you just, you know, ask questions throughout the conversation that are open-ended. So why do you think that? How does that affect, you know, the project? You know, things that are open-ended, not yes or no questions, or questions that can be answered with one word. Is it going well or not? No, it's not going. Oh, all right. Those closed-ended questions close off a conversation. Open-ended questions open up the conversation so that even if you aren't talking a very large amount in the conversation, because you're opening it up with smart questions, people will think of you as a good conversationalist, even though you're not doing much of the conversing. A couple other things here, and here's one of the secret, little secret ingredients in this presentation today. Good listening skills involve not only just saying, yes, I understand, acknowledging statements like that. So from time to time you might say something like, so you're telling me we're very well on track with this project. They'll say, yes, I am. This last word here, empathizing, is a loaded word. A lot of people think they know what empathizing means, but they don't really. They actually can misconstrue the word sympathizing with empathizing. And so sympathizing is when somebody has an emotionally laden something that they're getting off their chest, and I say I agree with that, and that is sympathizing. You know, if somebody says, let's talk about this particular person I work with. They are driving me crazy. Kevin, you know, I don't know how you put up with them. And I say, yeah, they're driving me crazy too. I am losing my mind. I don't know how I'm going to keep working with them. Well, because I'm the manager or I'm a person of influence, that implies that I'm going to do something about it. You don't want to do that. You know, and I've been a manager of some very large teams over the years, and one of the things I always tell people is you want to empathize, not sympathize. What empathy means, empathy is when, you know, and I'll give you a real world example. A person came into my office and said, I cannot work with Sue anymore. She is driving me absolutely crazy. She is so hard to work with. She is rude to our customers. She's rude to me. I just don't know what I'm going to do. And deep down inside, what I wanted to say was, oh yeah, Sue is driving me crazy too. But I can't do that. Sympathy implies action. But what empathizing does, when you empathize, you simply recognize the person's emotional condition. So what I said instead was, oh my gosh, you were really frustrated by Sue. You were so mad. And the research is really astounding. When you empathize with someone, not sympathize, but when you empathize with someone, they almost universally will take a deep breath and out. Yes, I am so mad. I don't know what to do. I don't know how I can keep working with her. By empathizing with someone, you de-escalate emotionally laden situations. If you sympathize, or even worse, you deny someone's feelings. Have you ever said to your spouse or significant other, don't be that way, my gosh, what's wrong with you? You have just ratcheted it up to, you turn the knob to 11. They are going to be furious now with you instead of whatever it was that made them angry before. So empathizing kind of lessens all the tension and makes things much, much better for everybody. And then you can begin to think about how to handle that particular situation. On top of that, there's a little ninja secret. This is a tactic. It's not a, it's tactical. It's just a very kind of situational sort of thing that you might use. But if you are asking someone some important questions, recognize how powerful silence is. People in their minds tend to misjudge the duration of an intentional silence by about 4 to 1. So if you let a heavy kind of question hang in the air, a half a second feels like 2 seconds to people. So if you say, why in the world did we make this architectural choice for this piece of software? And you say, why did the sales team choose to focus on these kind of goals? And you just let it hang in the air, people are going to feel really compelled to speak. If you're willing to wait 2 or more seconds, people begin to feel like they're in the Spanish Inquisition. They're going to start confessing all kinds of things. So if you are a listener and you need answers, recognize how powerful just letting silence hang in the air. And you'll see this in particular if you've ever gone through an interview or perhaps a situation like that. Sometimes a person will ask an interesting interview question and they won't even give the interview candidate time to answer because the candidate is thinking about their answer. They need a couple seconds to do it, and the interviewer can't tolerate a couple seconds of silence. So you see that they actually gave up their power in that exchange by throwing, oh, well, maybe it could be this or that, or, and so recognize how powerful silence can be as a listener. Now, another thing that will really build your credibility is to be a team builder. And one of the things that, you could say build your self-esteem is something that, you see some people promote. And I say build your team esteem. Tout your team successes, congratulate people and praise them, celebrate what they do together. If you just talk about yourself, that's bragging, and you lose credibility when you brag. But when you talk about other people, you build them up. People see you as a positive team builder, but you get a little bit of the shine from the praise that you're giving them. So that's the kind of thing where, again, reciprocity starts to build up, and pretty soon you find that other people are praising your hard work and contribution to the team effort because you did it for them first. So neat kind of concept, and it always pays dividends. Another thing that team builders do is they look for those leadership moments. They can be a clutch player when there's an emergency. They can kind of know what it is, the steps we need to take, what's the process we need to follow when things are not going well. And another thing that team builders do is they are often kind of flexible and dispassionate about their opinion. And what I mean by that is the idea that, well, if you ever watch Star Trek, Captain Kirk in the 60s, his first response was, fire phasers. And then later on when Captain Picard came along, his first response, when the Romulans were attacking, he turned to everybody in the bridge and he'd say, options. He was open to what it is that would be the right thing to do. And so it's the kind of thing that, hey, just by saying, I think I know what we want to do, but I want to know what everybody else thinks. What are the good and bad, the pros and cons of that? And then when you're trying to come to a team conclusion, focus on what it is the organization wants, what they're trying to achieve, and people come to consensus. And the thing that's powerful about consensus is that they're invested in it, right? So if you are a boss, you own the company, and you tell people what to do, and you yell at them when they're not doing what you tell them to do, they're not invested. In fact, they're looking for ways that they can get away from you. If they can spend all their time in the warehouse, they don't want to be with you in person. You're going to tell them something to do. On the other hand, if everybody comes together and agrees, the best thing for us at this time is, to finish all the, all the reorganization of the warehouse, and, let's all work on this together. Well, they've agreed to that. There's a tacit contract in there by saying, yeah, I agree with the consensus. So they're actually going to work on it even when you're not around, writing trail boss over them, because they were part of the decision and they feel like they had some ownership on it. So by building the team, you actually build up team success rather than just your individual authority. All right. Now, professionalism, this is a slide that has a lot of words. Competent, engaged, credible, accountable, honest, integrity, all those kinds of things. But I kind of feel like it boils down to a couple things. You care about your job, the work you need to do, and you respect the people for whom you are doing it. And so it's the kind of thing where, early in my career, I encountered some senior, I was a software developer very early in my career, and I encountered some senior software developers who, they liked what they were doing, and it was important to them to do a good job. And so that became my model for what does a professional do. And it was only after years of excuse me, of work and experience that I began to understand, what it meant in a broader sense, what kind of model I was trying to emulate in their behavior. Things like they would mitigate conflicts and confrontations. They wouldn't tell people they were stupid. They would say, you know what, there are some better alternatives. May I make a couple suggestions? And the person who was angry would say, okay, well, let's hear what those suggestions are. So really, really powerful when you show care and respect. And again, remember that law of reciprocity underpins all of this. When you show care and respect to others, you get it back. Another aspect of professionalism, which I hate to harp on, but it does make a difference as to how you present, what sort of way you dress, what sort of way your speech is. And I live in Middle Tennessee, just outside of Nashville, and I have friends who are brilliant, but they also talk with the most country accent you have ever heard on the planet. Does this speech pattern destroy their credibility? No, it doesn't. But it does mean they have to work harder than people who have the national standard accent, right? You may have seen these IT companies where, these guys come in to the server room and they're wearing Birkenstocks and shorts and tie-dye T-shirts. Does that degrade their competency and their professionalism? No, it doesn't erase it, but it means they start with a deficit. And so be conscious of that. If you know your audience all the time and you know exactly who you're going to see, then you don't have to change those things. You probably have already built up some credibility. But if you don't, some of us are in sales, or some of us have to, speak to mixed audiences a lot. Go higher than you need to rather than lower than you need to, because it's better to over-deliver than it is to under-deliver. Because if you under-deliver in terms of personal presentation and your image, you're going to erode your credibility. Now, all of those things together add up to building your kind of positive political capital, your ability to influence people. One of the things I do say is don't be this guy. This guy is Larry Ellison. I talk about him in the sense of IT people. And I know that many of you aren't IT people, but one of the things that IT people do is they're really arrogant. And, my wife, for example, worked in a huge, fabulous research hospital here in Nashville called Vanderbilt. And one of the things the IT people would do if she ever had a problem is they'd say, oh, just move out of the way and let me type, okay? Because it's going to be so much easier for me to do it than for you. And he'd kind of huff and roll his eyes and stuff. Don't be that guy. No matter what your skill set is, if you're in sales, if you were the owner of the company, if you act that way, people are going to reciprocate that way, and they're going to be like, I do not want to work with that guy because he is so rude, And I'm just kidding. They're not going to speak with that accent, but yeah, teach. If you know something that other people don't, remember the day that you didn't know those things. It wasn't that long ago that you learned them, and that's something I remind myself of constantly, is that I have something to learn from these people I'm sitting with too. So kind of summarize the first half, and we're running short on time. You build your political capital. You exhibit some or all of these 5 different kind of broader areas so that people begin to respect your opinion, and so that you can make requests and express opinions that will sway people. And it's very, very powerful. If you've got at least 3 of these, you've got it. You're going to be persuasive. Also, don't forget about your weaknesses. Have some self-awareness. If you know that you're an extremely outspoken person and you sometimes annoy people, then get an ally, someone who goes to the same meetings with you, and have a heart-to-heart with them and say, hey, I could use your help. I sometimes stick my foot in my mouth. And so if you see me about to go off the rails, give me this sign, and you make the sign of waving your hand in front of your throat, like cut it off. Get an ally to help you. And one of the things that's great about that is when you have allies, they'll help you, but then you have an opportunity to help them back. And again, we're back to reciprocity. That it reinforces that relationship, and you get this kind of positive feedback loop. So that's kind of the summary on building passive influence. If you are not actually in authority, use all of those things, and they will really make you the go-to person on your team. Now, direct influence is a little bit different. This is where we're all sitting in a meeting and we're trying to decide on something. Maybe it's that we're going to go to lunch. I don't know. Could be anything. And I want to convince people to do something, or I want to convince them not to do something, or some other sort of thing. And again, there's three broad categories. There's logical appeals. I'm going to appeal to your head sense. There's the emotional appeals. I'm going to appeal to your heart. And then there's the cooperative appeals. I'm going to use my hands. I'm going to cooperate with somebody. And by giving of my work or my time, I'm going to expect something back. That's what happens with the cooperative appeals. The direct methods of influence, there's 8 of them. And they fall into some broad categories. And you can see here as we go along that they're actually kind of logically organized a little bit. So what we have are rational appeals and intimidation. Believe it or not, you may not think intimidation is rational. You might be thinking of intimidation as bullying, but it's not necessarily bullying. In the professional world, it's not often bullying. It's more of a logical thing, and I'll explain that in a minute. We've got inspirational appeals and flattery. Those tend to be the kinds of emotional appeals. And then we've got here on the right-hand side, alliances, appealing up, which means I'm going to ask my boss or my boss's boss to do something. I could call in a debt or a favor, or I can engage people in consultations. Now, one of the things that's interesting about consultation, well, I'll talk about that in a minute, but keep in mind, influence and the ability to persuade people is a lot like banking. I keep using this term of political capital. It's like a bank account where you keep putting money in. And when you ask people to do things that they don't really want to do, they deduct from your political capital account. If you ask them or convince them to do something and you convince them that it's in their best interest, you don't actually remove any of your political influence. Your political capital, rather. It's also, influence and persuasion abilities is also like physics. Okay, you're like, say what? So in physics, influence takes on characteristics of the laws of thermodynamics. And one of the laws of thermodynamics, I think it's the second law, says there's this principle called inertia. And it says an object in rest will tend to stay at rest unless acted upon by a external force. And then there's this other concept of momentum, in which an object in motion will tend to stay in motion unless acted upon by an external force. Like, you roll a ball, and gravity is what makes it stop. Gravity and resistance on the surface it's rolling on is what makes it stop. And it's the same thing with persuasion. So when you win over someone to an alliance, let's say, you develop momentum in that relationship. You are now more persuasive. The next time you try to appeal to somebody else, people are now aware that you have been persuasive in that case of winning alliances, and you're more likely to win them over in the future. One of the reasons I, as a team leader, when I'm taking over a new team and giving people assignments, is I actually explicitly assign them to do things that they already do. And then I can celebrate that. It's like, hey, you finished, the TPS reports. I'm like, yeah, I do that every Tuesday. I'm like, no, this is great. You got it done on time, and I really appreciate that. And what happens is you build up momentum now just based on things that they're already doing. And that means the next time you ask something difficult of them, they're much more likely to do something for you because they're aware that you pay attention to how hard they work. So it's a very interesting concept, and it reciprocates as well. So let's talk about the head appeals, right? Now, the interesting thing about head appeals is they typically take two forms. There's the rational appeal, and then there's intimidation. And why would I group these together? Well, intimidation can be like, I'm going to put you in a headlock and give you a wedgie or a nookie until you give me your lunch money. That is a possible form of intimidation. But what we find much, much more often in the professional world is that a rational appeal is, let's say, for example, we haven't upgraded our office software in forever. We're on, Microsoft Office 2000, whatever, 2003 or something. And I need to convince the boss that we need to upgrade. So what I might do in a rational appeal is talk about how I found some special bargains, so the price is going to be a lot less, and the improvement that we get in performance and productivity is going to be equal to 5% of our total work time. And if you multiply all of our salaries times 5%, we're actually saving money by buying this new software. That would be a rational appeal. In this context of direct persuasion, intimidation would be something that we call FUD. You might have heard of salespeople using FUD. FUD stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And so when I'm trying to persuade people to do something, what I'm typically going to try to do is, I'm not going to bully them. That's not the intimidation I'm going to use. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about how the universe, how the cosmos is going to pay us back. It's like if we don't upgrade our backup software so that we can get all of our systems backed up every night, the next time we have a crash, we're going to lose tons of money because we probably can't rebuild any of these systems. Our accounts payable, who knows how long it'll take to get back up on. We're going to miss, we're going to miss all kinds of invoicing. It's going to cost us way more money than that. So that's typically how you're going to see intimidation used as a direct argument, a direct persuasive appeal to someone. Some of the common mistakes of rational appeals or intimidation is that you hit them with too much data to begin with. You're not even sure yet if this is something that they would consider, and yet you're making a pitch. You've got all the details, you've got all the facts, you've figured out how much money you're going to save, but you don't even know if that's something that is possible. If we're not making a profit this year and we are a small 8-person business, we're not going to spend any money that we don't have to, right? So you've got to have the big picture before you can really get very far when you do a rational appeal. Another thing that I find people do a lot is they cook up the idea independently, and then they only present that idea after it's fully baked. And they haven't talked about it with anybody else on the team. And this is, you need some friends, friends who can vet your ideas, let you know whether it's a good idea or not, before you take it up the chain or before you take it to people who you don't know and trust very well. So you want to take it to trusted people first and make sure that, hey, this sounds like a good idea. It aligns with the goals and the needs of the business or of the audience that you're speaking to. And so they'll make sure that you're on the right track. And so I see that a lot. People don't do that. And so when they present it to the person or the audience that they're trying to convince, the audience is like, this is nowhere near our radar. We are not even about to discuss this today. Now, emotional and hard appeals, again, these fall into the two main buckets I told you about, the inspirational appeal versus flattery. And again, just like intimidation is a loaded word, probably means something a little different than what you think it does in this context. Flattery is the same way. And so, if you've ever watched a sports film, you've watched Rudy or Hoosiers or Remember the Titans or, any of those kind of films, about 2/3 of the way through, the team is getting crushed by their biggest opponent, and, the coach comes in at halftime. He's got a big gulp drink in his hand, and he slings it against the wall, and he's like, what is going on out there? I know you were better than this. We have trained too hard for this. We are too good of a team for this. You such and such player are, hot dogging too much. You such and such player, you're being way too conservative. You can do way better than this. That's what an inspirational appeal is. An inspirational appeal doesn't talk about what necessarily the hard data is. It appeals to what our better selves are. I know you can do better than this. Like in my case, when I led a very large dev team, 50 some odd people, almost 60 people, there were times where we had to do what you call a death march. It's the last couple of weeks before the ship date, and we've got to put in 60 hours a week. And some managers in the company would tell their teams, you got to do this because you want to stay employed. And nobody liked working on those teams, being threatened like that. On the other hand, after I learned these techniques, I would say things like, I hired you because you were the smartest, most ethical, most intelligent, highest integrity people I could find. And we've established a reputation as a team for all of those things. Now, if we start to miss our dates, we're going to erode that reputation. And I think all of us here find it very, very important to uphold that reputation of how good we are, that we're the most productive development team in the company. Now, I didn't know for a fact at that time that we were the most productive, but that's our better selves. We like to imagine ourselves. Now, I did find out afterwards that we were, but it's the kind of thing where I said, you know what, let's do this for ourselves because it's about our reputation. We think we're the best, and I think we can prove it to everybody else. And the team was like, yeah, we can. We made our deadlines. Nobody was mad that they had to do it. And at the end of it, it reinforced itself. It reciprocated on itself. Other teams were like, yeah, you guys really are pretty amazing. We're really surprised that, that you were able to do that, and you seemed happy. So that's what an inspirational appeal is. Now, flattery, when done right, is pretty subtle. When it's done wrong, it is what we say down here on these common mistakes. It's seen as insincere. And so, people are like, I don't believe you one bit. You've lost credibility at that point. But where flattery can be very persuasive is when it's done in an honest and comparative way. So let's say, for example, you are trying to convince someone to, let's say you're in sales and you're trying to convince someone to, spend some time with your product. And you might say to them, look, we've had some interaction here, we've talked a little bit, and I can tell that you are a lot more, you're a lot more attentive, and you're a lot more detail focused, and you are a lot more perceptive than my average customer. So I think it would really be beneficial for you if you spent some time examining this, looking at all the literature, pay attention to it, read it, and call me back with any questions. Now, I have just flattered that person. But two things happened. One, I was honest because that person was exhibiting all those characteristics, those behaviors, I should say. And two, it was a comparative thing that didn't knock anybody down. All it did was praise them. I said they were more perceptive than my average customer. And they think, wow, that's cool. I guess I do need to pay a little more attention to this particular behavior because it's so beneficial. So now I've convinced this person to look at my product literature because I gave them some flattery, but it was true. And so they're going to reciprocate in kind by saying, oh, you know what, I will take a minute and look at that because to be perceptive, you have to analyze things. And you've already told me I'm more perceptive than most, so I've got to kind of reciprocate and prove that to you. Now, that's all subconscious. They're not actually explicitly saying those things, but that's going on in the back of their mind. Now, finally, the cooperative appeal is a very powerful thing. It works really well, of course, in team situations. And there's a dark side to this as well, to the cooperative appeal, just like there were to the other types. One thing that most people in general like is to be recognized for their talents. So let's say, for example, for consultation, for example, if I go into another IT person's office and I say, Joey, you are really well informed on licensing, and I'd really like some help from you on these licensing problems I have. Just could you help me answer some questions for me and that sort of thing? In a sense, I haven't explicitly said it, but I have recognized him for his intelligence and for his knowledge of licensing on different kinds of software products. So this is something that is good, right? He's like, wow, that I'm pretty inclined to answer his questions, assuming it doesn't take too long and, it's not bad for me. So it really helps if your audience is similarly inclined, and also it looks like a radio station call letters there, WIFM, but what's in it for me? And so that's not so much a big deal on consultation because you're just asking for an opinion, but in alliances, or when you extend a favor or call in a favor or a debt, the other person is going to kind of recognize the situation as transactional. So if in the beginning, I mentioned how maybe you recognize one of your weaknesses is just kind of speaking off the top of your head. Maybe you're impulsive. You put your foot in your mouth occasionally. So you ask a person to, hey, if you see me doing this, I trust you. Just let me know that I'm kind of going into the weeds and I need to reel it back in. Well, they're going to recognize that that's a little bit transactional. So they're going to say at some point with an alliance or extending a favor or calling in a favor, they're going to expect you to do the same at some point. That's not a bad thing because most of us don't mind doing that. With appealing up, that is the one that has a bit of a dark side. And I mention that because a lot of people do this. I didn't get the right response from someone, or so now I'm going to go to their boss. This person said something I didn't feel was socially acceptable, so I'm going to HR. You better recognize that there will be paybacks for that. And sometimes it's better to go through your informal channels. Talk to your peers first before you go to HR. Talk to people you trust at the same level in the company as you. Or recognize that this may cause people to say, you know what, I'm not sure I want to hang out with that person. Now, on those other three at the top line, alliances, consultations, and so forth, also recognize that you can't overuse these. If you fail to reciprocate or to recognize that it is a transactional sort of thing, recognize that it's expendable, it's depletable. So if you overuse consultation, and I'm always in Joey's office asking him questions, he's going to start thinking, when does this guy ever do his own work? Am I doing it all for him? And so he's going to start telling me he's busy and he can't help me. So if you do it every now and then, this can really build up a relationship. But if you do it too often, you can degrade the relationship. Now, in your slides, which I'm going to make available to Brian, and you can also get them on my website, kevinkline.com. I do have a full case study, and I've hidden all those slides here. I just want to mention it to you. These are the 4 steps that you would want to follow if you're going to try and appeal to your boss and convince them to do something. The thing to remember here is, of course, you have to have the basic beginning level of credibility. If you're not a credible person on his or her team, you got to build that up first. The other big mistake that a lot of people make when they pitch an idea to their boss is that the idea doesn't really align with the main goals of that team or that organization. And so if I had time, I'd give you lots of examples I have seen over the years as a leader having people pitch things to me. And so it's the kind of thing that, read the slides if you are interested in doing this. And I'd love to get your feedback as well about whether this was successful for you and some thoughts about that. But one thing that's really interesting is that different people respond differently. So you might try a rational appeal and it never worked with your boss, when instead what you really needed to try was an emotional appeal because they weren't motivated by rational decisions in a particular situation. All right, so I know we're just about out of time. Let me skip ahead to wrapping up. So hopefully we've dispelled some myths. If you're introverted, if you're dealing with people who are natural-born leaders, don't think that you can't do this too. You can. It's a set of behaviors. Now, it may be exhausting and tiring for you, but you can absolutely do it. Also, remember that influence carries weight just through passive activities. If you're credible, if you're a good outward communicator, if you're a good listener, team builder, if you're very professional, that builds your ability to influence teams. And then we have the main direct appeals that you can use: an emotional appeal to the heart, a logical appeal to the head, cooperative appeals between teams, and so forth. All right, so with that, I'm not sure, do we have time for any questions, Brian?
Yeah, let's open it up, I guess, for a few seconds. If you have any questions, we're actually out of time now. Is there a way they can kind of tweet you, or what's the best way to ask questions to you if since we're out of time right now? Should they send you an email or?
Right. So you can. This is my personal email address here. Okay. If you want to tweet or message me on Facebook or Twitter, all of those work at KE Kline. So if you went to Facebook and then /KE Kline or LinkedIn /KE Kline, you'd get me there.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. And yeah, we're unfortunately out of time today, but thank you guys. This session was recorded and will be posted also in a later time. Have a great day. And Kevin, thank you so much for your insight today.
Well, thank you, Brian. Appreciate the invite.
You too. Goodbye.